All right, let's say our La'asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah
Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
kishanu
kishanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
divrei
la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Praise to you, Lord our God, rule of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. Alrighty. So, tonight we are doing a story or a set of sub-stories, I guess, in honor of the Torah reading that is coming up this Saturday, the Shabbat, the beginning of the Exodus story. And there were several women that were involved in saving the Jewish people and Moses at the beginning of the Exodus story. So we are going to look at things from their perspective. Starting with Act 1. Carol, would you read, please?
Sure. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, the other Puah, saying, "When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool," more precisely the brick or stone supports used by Egyptian women during childbirth. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing, letting the boys live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous, literally animals." Oh boy. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. Then Pharaoh charged all of his people, saying, "Every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live."
Thank you.
Read the rest. This is from the biblical book of Exodus after the Israelites had been enslaved. The rabbis noticed that in the last verse it seemed to be addressed to all of the Egyptians, telling them to drown their newborn sons. They came up with an explanation for this, that the astrologers could predict when the Redeemer of the Israelites would be born, but they didn't know whether he would be born to an Israelite or an Egyptian. Thus, for one day, Pharaoh wanted all newborn boys to be killed. While the rabbis connect, I've got to turn this up a little. While the rabbis connect the midwives with Moses' mother and sister, this connection is not made explicitly in the text. What might have motivated the Hebrew midwives?
Thank you.
So, David, is this the same Pharaoh who the Bible says a new Pharaoh arose who did not know of Joseph and therefore enslaved the Hebrews? Because this came after the enslavement started. Do we have
Yes.
any knowledge of whether it's the same person?
The text seems to suggest that it is the same person. I am double checking. Yeah, the new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. That's verse 8. And this is like 6 verses later. So we can reasonably assume that it is the same Pharaoh.
Interesting. So why did it say he only wanted to kill the baby boys for one day? Did I misread that?
Yeah. So what's going on here is that the rabbis are trying to figure out why verse 22 appears to say that everybody should drown the baby boys in Egypt, Israelite, or Egyptian. You could read it as not saying that, but that would be a reasonable interpretation when Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born, you shall throw into the Nile. So the rabbis are like, why would Pharaoh tell his own people to kill their babies? And then they come up with an explanation that the astrologers could predict when the Redeemer, the baby boy that would redeem the Israelites, would be freed, but they couldn't predict if it would be an Egyptian, if this would grow up as an Egyptian or an Israelite baby, which, in fairness to the astrologers, Moses was kind of both. So since they could predict the day, Pharaoh said, okay, that's the day you should kill all your baby boys.
Oh, I see.
And I would assume that if the astrologers had come up with that, they probably, I mean, I'm guessing they had a range, right? Like sometime between this period of time and that period of time, the Redeemer will be born. Or did they just say it's on this day, any baby born on this day? I mean, I guess my question is, was it like, babies, all babies born within the last month? Or was it just babies born on a particular day, or, that sort of thing? If that's what I think.
That's a good question. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
Heard of it, but didn't watch it.
This is probably not how you anticipated me starting my answer to your question. But, well, I have not actually seen The Matrix. I have seen parts of it, and I understand the general premise of it. So in the movie The Matrix, if you go into the Matrix, then you can operate within the world that is within the Matrix. And if you are not in the Matrix, then you have a different perspective on the same situation. So if you go into the world of this midrash, then these are really smart astrologers who know precisely the day. If you walk out of the matrix and out of this midrash and look at it from what is this midrash doing? Since the midrash is trying to answer the question, why did Pharaoh tell all his people to drown their baby boys? The midrash is not concerned about the accuracy of the astrology, the realistic accuracy range of the astrologers. It wants to make this as precise as possible. So whoever authored this midrash, since they presumably came up with it, they can create a situation in which the astrologers are really smart. If this was a real life thing, the astrologers probably would have had a range in order to hedge their bets.
They should have given each pregnant woman a Chinese fortune cookie, and they would have known exactly who was going to have the baby.
They didn't need to. David, in support of what you just said, we have indication from Yosef and his brothers back in the end of Breshit, or back maybe a parsha before, where Yosef is dealing with his brothers without having revealed himself yet, and the chalice in the pack of Binyamin, and Yosef confronts his brothers, and I believe it's in the text that he says, "How could you do such a thing to me?" Meaning to this viceroy figure that's before them, because did you not think that I would be able to divine who had this and what was going on and who did this thing to me? So Yosef seems to have given some credibility to what was able to be divined or otherwise seen. In this case, it's astrologers, but Yosef seems to have given Egypt the minds available to look at things and divine them or figure them out or see them via astrology or whatever means they were. So Yosef already gave credibility to the Egyptians, society at least, for having these people around. And my question is there any significance about drowning them in the water?
Is there significance of drowning them?
Yes, using water or drowning.
All right, so there are a lot of ways of answering your question as to whether or not there's significance of the drowning. One way of looking at it is Pharaoh would have told his people, I'm just checking the text to see. All right, so one way of looking at it is Pharaoh told the midwives to like actually kill newborn children with a tool or with their hands or whatever, and that clearly was not working. Maybe people who were in the business of helping newborns live were squeamish about killing them with their own hands or a tool or something. So perhaps Pharaoh thought, okay, we will take a different approach, and you just have to like drop the baby. You don't have to like end its life with your own hands or with a tool. Maybe that will be more successful. So that's one way of looking at why might Pharaoh have chosen drowning. Another way of saying the significance of drowning would be to connect it to would be to connect it to the first plague, the plague of blood, that the blood was a reminder to the Egyptians of all of the babies that were killed in that river. A third way of looking at it would be from a literary perspective. You could take this as God orchestrating things, or you could take this as a clever author of this story, whatever your personal inclination is. But as we will see, spoiler alert for Act 2 of our story, Moses's mother will in fact put her baby into the Nile. And this sets up, it's in volleyball, this would be the set before the spike. This sets up her being able to say, Pharaoh, I have done exactly what you have asked. I have put my baby boy into the Nile per instructions. You happen to not say anything about what you could use when putting your baby into the Nile. So 3 different angles on your fairly straightforward question, and indubitably there are many more as well.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
You know what I find so ironic about this proposal, that this was to throw all the babies in, is, and the astrologers and everything, is that I always think of that passage from Esther, that God is able to, and obviously God is able to do what God wants to accomplish. He's able to accomplish what he is able to accomplish. He's delivered, his people many, many times. But, where Mordecai says to Esther, if you fail to act, God will raise up someone to deliver his people regardless. And in this case, the Egyptians and their astrologers think they're being so smart that there is going to be a deliverer for the people, for the Israelites, and we'll just kill all these babies. And the ironic part of it is that the deliverer is raised in the Egyptian royal household. I just think it's incredibly ironic. So
yes, it's like the best place to hide a book is on a bookcase.
They never considered that maybe a woman could be the deliverer.
That's true. And that's part of this text here, is that Pharaoh only fears physical resistance, but as we will see, his plans are consistently thwarted by women. And he's not anticipating that a woman could pose a threat to his plans in any way.
Or the mindset of the astrologers was such that what they were seeing from their astrological means was that it would be a male, and they didn't get to the question of female. In other words, it might not be a negative against females. It may be just the vision was male, and that's the astrologers just reported their vision to Pharaoh. And the vision was a male born in a certain time. And they didn't know if it was Egyptian or Hebrew, so there were things they didn't know, so we can presume that they reported what they saw in their heads, in their prophecies.
No, but just
So
about
girls don't take offense yet.
I just have a quick question, David, about this situation. Moses' father doesn't seem to be mentioned here, at least at this point in the story.
Mhm.
Are there any midrash that kind of like, or is there like a notable one that you know of that talks about how his father interacted with this whole situation?
Yeah. So in fairness, Moses' father is not mentioned here because we're still in chapter 1 and Moses doesn't show up till chapter 2. However, there is a midrash that at this point, Moses' father, who we will later find out is named Amram, and decides that he is going to divorce his wife, who we will later find out is named Yocheved. And then they already have 2 kids, Aaron and Miriam. And Miriam says to her father, "You are worse than Pharaoh because you are a leader. You have just divorced your wife, and all the other Israelite men have divorced their wives, following your lead. And this means that not only will there not be any baby boys, there will not be any baby girls." And then her father, Amram, says to Miriam, "Okay, you are wise. I will take your advice." And he marries his wife again. This is a midrash set that answers the question, as we'll see it in Acts 2, of why does it say that Moses' father married Moses' mother if we know that they already had 2 kids? So this midrash comes to explain what's going on here with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So these midwives have direct orders from the king of Egypt, who has life and death in his hands, telling them that if they want to keep their jobs and possibly their lives, they need to go kill some babies. And they choose not to. So what might be motivating them?
One would be fear of God. 2 would be that they don't want to kill the person who's going to get them out of slavery.
If they know that, yes.
Perhaps they're just exceptionally kind people, and they think that that kindness, even at the expense of their own lives, maybe even without any expectation of any kind of reward later, is infinitely better on its own rather than having a reward later. So, or any concept of a reward. Maybe it could be that.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at the second question. How might the midwives have been feeling when they were called in before Pharaoh? So we're looking at verse 18. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing, letting the boys live?"
Fear
fearful,
their life.
probably, they're scared, you know,
Had a girl.
what he was gonna do to them.
One good point. Excellent.
When I was a lot younger, and I can't remember what it was that I had a moral conflict with at work. I can't remember. It was back in my 20s and I'm in my 60s now. So it's almost half a century ago. But I do remember there was a time at work and I made a decision that I wasn't going to do something because it conflicted with what my moral standard. And and I remember thinking that there was the possibility that I could actually get fired over this for not doing this. And I remember going into my boss with this knowledge and telling him that, I really can't do X, Y, Z, and saying why. And the surprising thing is that he was kind of like this Pharaoh story. Oh, okay. And I don't know if he got somebody else to do it or whatever, but I didn't lose my job and, I didn't suffer any consequences. But I would think that would be similar what they were thinking. There were consequences for disobeying Pharaoh and disobeying, because wasn't Pharaoh kind of like a god in Egypt? And so if you disobey that, then you could, I would think, up to death, would be the penalty for disobedience. And so I'm thinking they probably went in thinking, okay, let's see what, how this works out. So
Diane, I had the exact same thing happen. My first job, I was working for this large manufacturing company as a secretary, and I was only 20. And the woman who ran the switchboard would go into the bathroom and drink and drink and drink. And the boss said to me that every time she did that, he didn't know what she was doing in there. I had to take over the switchboard. In those days, it had all these plugs and everything in it. And I wouldn't do it. So I did get fired. And I was happy because I wanted to get out of there because she was just drunk every day. It was horrible.
Right.
And so I became an alcoholism counselor, which is kind of funny. Years later.
David, do we know yet if Pharaoh knows that these, or do we know from the text yet, let alone Pharaoh, but if we do, then does Pharaoh know that these women are or likely to be Jewish women, the midwives?
Yeah, so
That text it says it?
so it says in verse 15, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives.
Oh, it says okay.
And
I'm good with that.
Actually, that's the third question. So you segued very nicely.
Thank you.
So the term Hebrew midwives could either mean midwives who are Hebrews or midwives to the Hebrews who are potentially Egyptian. So depending on how this goes, how would this change how you see them? Whether they are Hebrews not killing Hebrew babies or Egyptians not killing Hebrew babies.
The vows only came out about the 9th century. So do we really know what the original vowels would have been?
No, it's a matter of interpretation, and there are 3 sources from the 200s BCE to the 800s CE that interpret it 3 different ways. The Masoretes, who put in the vowels that we use today, vowed it or vocalized it so that it means Hebrews who were midwives. The Josephus, who lived around the year 100-ish, a bit before,
CE?
CE, thank you, interpreted as midwives who were not Jewish. And the Septuagint, which was a translation into Greek in Alexandria around the year 200 BCE left it ambiguous. So it could have, so three respected authorities took it three different directions. Now the question is, so what? How does that affect how you see it?
The only thing I would say is that if the midwives were Egyptians, I don't think they would have been as ready to go against Pharaoh as Hebrew midwives would have.
That sounds good, Herb. I like it. Yeshkoch.
I would also suggest that they were Hebrew because in most societies, when you have a slave population, the non-slave population is not as willing to service that population, and they don't care whether it's a good and healthy birth and that sort of thing. And that would be my thought along those lines too.
I think that if it was the case that they were Egyptian, it would just sort of speak to their virtue even more. I think like as individuals, it would make me see them even, I think it's even more virtuous, because especially in the ancient world, but this is an issue now, like it's when you're part of the same culture, there's like the connection there. So maybe there's, when you're talking about strangers, maybe there's that basis for empathy for like within your own community, but these would be people who are outside of our community having that empathy, to disobey like an unethical order from an authority. And I think that if they were Egyptian, that would sort of speak to their personal virtue even more.
I think that if they were Egyptians, I think they would still follow Pharaoh's rule. And even though the ladies were having babies at once, they probably would have still killed them. Because that's the rule, the law. And you have to follow what the laws of the land is. And I don't know if it does say they were Egyptian women. Does it, David?
So the text says Hebrew midwives, which could be interpreted as midwives to the Hebrews or midwives who were Hebrews.
Okay. I mean, I learned that they were Hebrews.
Right. That is how.
One interpretation.
Yeah, that's how it is vowelized. But there are other versions, earlier interpretations before the vowels were put in, that made it more ambiguous.
Okay.
And some commentators as well.
Yeah, the other reason why people think that they were Hebrews is because of the midrash that connects Shiphrah and Puah with Moses' mother and sister.
Commentary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good point. So we got some controversy here.
We do.
At this point anyway.
Yes. All right, let's go on to Act 2. Evan, would you be willing to read that, please?
From where it says a certain member.
Yep.
Okay, a certain member of the house of Levi went and took into his household as his wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket from him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at the distance to learn what would befall him. Context. This is the next part of the story. Some connect the boat to a second womb, while some connect it to Noah's Ark. Both are described as a teva, the only two uses of the word in the Bible. While Moses' mother is unnamed here, she is later identified as Yocheved, Exodus 6:20, Numbers 26:59. Similarly, his sister is identified later as Miriam, Numbers 25:59, Chronicles 6:3.
Thank you.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, go. You can. Do you want to read the question also?
Sure. How might you go about hiding a newborn baby these days for 3 months? Definitely not an easy task.
That's not, you're right.
A crying baby, that's not too easy.
Was he crying?
A baby who cries, Barry, would be hard to hide.
Was this one crying? Something special.
Had to have been, right? It's a baby.
I don't know.
I
This
don't
is
know how,
Moshe. This is baby Moshe.
yeah, I don't know how she did it.
Unless she disguised him as a girl.
Ah, very clever.
Good thought.
That's clever.
That is clever. Nice going, Diane. Wow.
Very good, Diane.
Dressed him in pink.
Yeah.
Huh.
Today, when you see a baby, you can't tell if it's a boy or a girl anymore, so.
It's sometimes true, Mama. Well said.
That's funny.
It's true too.
All right. What moments have you let a child go or been let go by a parent? What was that like?
What was the question? I missed it.
Put that
What-
question back up.
Read it again, please.
Yeah. What moments have you let a child go or been let go by a parent? What was that like?
Define let go. Please.
There's
I meant to say please.
and anytime that your child is no longer fully within your control.
Hmm.
The garden.
I was once in Marshall Fields in Oak Park when my middle son Jordan was 2, and all of a sudden I looked around and he was gone. And
Oh,
my other boy, who was a year old,
Scary.
was crying, where is he? The Santa Claus had come down they used to have a Santa Claus in Oak Park. And Jordy followed him into the elevator. So over the loudspeaker, they said, has anyone lost a small boy? He's with Santa Claus.
Boy,
But boy, that was plenty scary.
scary is right.
That's
Wow.
when I got, I used to always, and after that, take the harness off the buggy, and he had it wrapped around him and I held the other end.
I remember when my wife went back to work after our daughter was born. And she found that to be a very hard thing to do that first day.
I'm sure. Yeah.
She couldn't let go, huh?
From the opposite side, I remember when one of my father's parents died. And it was his mother and father died a year apart. And I think I was like 4 years old, 3 years old and 4 years old. And of course, the little ones were always shielded from that. And I was tossed over to be with somebody who I didn't really know to take care of me the whole day while they did the funeral and the Shiva after. And I remember that awful feeling of being abandoned and scared because somebody died and I didn't know what was going on. And yeah, it wasn't a good feeling. I
Oh,
still,
and I bet as a therapist, you did what I did after, would tell people to take their kids
yeah.
to
Yeah.
see what happens.
In
Yeah.
those days, they didn't do it, and they just dumped
Back
me.
then, they didn't know.
They dumped me at Shirley Lieberman's house. And I was panic stricken the whole day. And
Oh my.
that was terrible.
Wow.
Romantic.
All right. Moses' mother follows Pharaoh's orders precisely. She puts her baby boy in the Nile. Have you ever followed orders in a way that undermines them? Sort of a, well, you never said I couldn't do X sort of thing.
During COVID, um, um, when it was kind of winding down and um, companies started wanting their employees to come back into the office. I was working for a company in Elk Grove Village, and I didn't feel comfortable going back into the office because I never really had a COVID policy during the whole COVID thing. And so it was a bizarre situation. Anyway, they wanted people to start coming back into the office, and I didn't feel comfortable yet. And I reported to so it's not important who I reported to, but anyway, I reported to the CEO. And they sent out this directive, everybody was supposed to come back in. And I ended up replying, and he had told me at one point he never worried about me because he knew I worked really hard at home. He never, and it was not too long before then he had said something about, I don't worry about you. It doesn't matter to me where you work because you always get your stuff done. So I kind of sent back an email and I said, well, I appreciate what, Larry said, and I think I'm going to continue to work from home. And I forget how I phrased it, but it was along those lines. So that's an example when I did it, and they never came back and said anything. I'm like, you said it didn't matter. So, okay, I'm going to stay home.
Could I make a respectful response?
Yeah.
That seems more to me like you got excused from following the orders as opposed to doing the orders in a way that was
Well, no, he had said
tried to
it.
do something in a different way than the boss would have wanted.
No, he had said it like a month or two before the directive came out, to come back into the office. And so I just kind of took his words and turned it around and said, well, since you said this, I think I'll continue to work from
Yes. And so this is a good example of what I wrote in the chat at the beginning of class, that when I start a class, I never know what's going to happen. This seems to be a question that is challenging to respond to, that there may not be so many examples out there that amongst all of you can come up with one that would fit this question. So I have learned that this is a harder question than, for instance, number 2, when
Indeed.
we have all been children of parents, and many of us have been parents, and so we have many examples to draw on. All right. Speaking of number 2, Rabbi Anita Silvert is a rabbi in the Chicago area.
I know her.
She gave a Eli talk, which is the Jewish version of a TED talk, about parenting as one long act of letting go, from the beginning all the way through parenting adult children, which I have not yet done, but many of you have. So I assume that you know what she's talking about. So I bring you this video to look at in your own time. All right.
Check them out.
Phil, would you be willing to read scene 3, please, or act 3?
Sure. Pardon me. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy, crying. She took pity on it and said, This must be a Hebrew child. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter answered, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moshe, says here, from the Hebrew for born of, associated with Masha, I drew him out of the water.
Okay.
Context. This is the next part of the story. The rabbis give Pharaoh's daughter the name Batya, meaning daughter, God. Oh, Batya. She needed someone to
Okay.
nurse the baby because not being pregnant, she wasn't making milk, and there was no formula.
What do they call that, lactating?
Hmm?
What do they call that, lactating? Is that what that
Yes,
is?
exactly.
Okay. She wasn't lactating.
Yes. All right. And so thank you, Phil. Why might Pharaoh's daughter have chosen to defy her father?
Mother instincts.
Sounds as good as any.
Okay. What might Pharaoh's daughter have told her father when Moses came to live with her around age 2 or 3?
I want to keep him, Dad. This is the boy I drew out of the water. I want to keep him.
Was she childless? That's why she wanted a baby?
We don't
No.
know.
This is a good guess.
Could she have been barren, and that was the reason why she wanted to keep him? And Pharaoh just had compassion or pity on her because she couldn't have a child or something.
Entirely good explanation. Possibly the world's newest midrash. Good job.
Would you let me enhance it? Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask why you say the child was 2 or 3 years old when it doesn't say that, and I mean it doesn't say in particular.
Age.
Well,
Yeah.
could have been a lot
So-
older.
Trigger event.
I mean, could have gone on. I just wondered why you
Yeah.
say that in this story.
Trigger event.
Yeah. So I chose those ages because if Moses, not yet named at that point, was going with his mother for the purpose of nursing, then children start eating solids around 4 to 6 months, but they continued to nurse some of them until age 2 or 3, probably closer to 2 for most of them. So once Moses was no longer nursing, then that seems like there would have been no more of an excuse to keep him, and therefore she would have brought him at that point.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I'm just wondering because it doesn't, I thought it might see the word weaned, and I remember now this is not one of those stories where we hear about the child who was weaned, like Samuel. So
right.
Exactly. Samuel was
it's hard to bring a young, an adolescent boy and say, I'd like you to meet my son. So that would be harder. It's right out of Porgy and Bess, she drew him, she says, from that stream. So it ain't
Yeah.
really so. That's the other implication or possible way of reading.
Begging me to suggest that that's why maybe
One thing,
Pharaoh allowed her to do it, or his daughter to do this, because the child was still young enough to be watched in Pharaoh's house and kept an eye on to be comfortable that this child should not be allowed to be the redeemer. That's what I'm thinking, that Pharaoh thought that there was be enough influence in the house to keep an eye on the child. That's my guess.
But if he was a foundling, was there any indication to Pharaoh that he came to her the way he did, that she actually found him floating in the water sometime before and made an arrangement to have him nursed until he could be weaned and then brought him home? She could have made up any story as to how she found him, and didn't necessarily have to be a little Hebrew baby.
2 words, it depends.
Yep. That is a good point. All right, if you had only 2 to 3 years to impart Judaism to an infant, knowing that they might not consciously remember anything that you did, how might you do it?
Speech. Child learns to speak by then or before. So if you speak to the child, encourage the child to speak back, maybe, just maybe, it creates a memory. And an instinct, oh, all of a sudden, sometime later, oh, I remember when my mom did this to me or my dad did that to me, in terms of speaking out. It's possible. It's the only thing I can think of.
Sing Hebrew lullabies.
Have taken the child to her house to light Hanukkah candles and have him at the Seder. And it was busy. If the Pharaoh's daughter was always busy, she might be able to take the boy home.
Yeah, as a follow-on to that last statement, I was wondering whether the mother went and became a nanny in the household with Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, it doesn't say one way or the other, but it kind of crossed my mind. I can't imagine Pharaoh's daughter wanting to change diapers, but then again, she may have had some Egyptian nannies. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because on the one hand, we see from verse 5 on the screen that Pharaoh's daughter had slave girls. On the other hand, Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites for the purpose of them building cities, Pithom and Ramses. So it's unclear if the Hebrews would have become the slave girls to Pharaoh's daughter, or if they would have only been for manual labor. Could go either way, I suppose. All right, so given the time, I'm going to show you what else is in the source sheet.
Well, we got through everything, David.
You did get through everything.
Yeah,
Mazel tov,
yay.
everybody. So here's a midrash, a cinematic midrash from the Prince of Egypt that shows the same parts that we looked at. Appendix A is a poem by Jamie Went titled Yocheved. Appendix B is a bar mitzvah devar Torah about Pharaoh's daughter and what might have motivated her. Appendix C is the full story altogether. And then appendices D through, I think, I are rabbinic texts, either Talmudic or Midrashic or commentaries on these three stories that we looked at today. So if you want to dive into the weeds of what other people have had to say about this, appendices D through I are there for you for that. And if you don't want to, that's why they're at the end. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. Stop recording.